And I'd like to introduce Miss Leah Downing. Can we put the spotlight on Leah?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot. Well, should I just go ahead and start? Yes? Okay. So my name is Leah Downing, and I have had a variety of careers in my life. I've worked as a dancer and a yoga teacher, but then when my family relocated to El Paso, Texas, my husband, who is a combat veteran of the Marines and served in the Gulf War in the late 80s and early 90s, he got a job, a position at Fort Bliss as a contractor working for pre-deployment troops who were heading over, and they had to look for IEDs, which stands for Improvised Explosion Device, roadside bombs, booby traps, whatever. There's a bunch of names for them. And at that time, he had to get a security clearance.
1 second. Al, could you put the video on, please? Tape it? Got it? Okay. Sorry about that. I want to make sure you're...
That's okay. It's no problem. I've been doing Zooms with my writing group and people doing yoga for the past couple of months. I think everybody's getting used to the format. And anyway, so this would have been around 2008 timeframe. He had to get a security clearance, and the woman who came out to interview him, the federal investigator, to see if he, was capable of keeping national secrets, he struck up a conversation with her and said, I think my wife could do this. And she gave him her card. Long story short, I got hired as a federal investigator doing background investigations for soldiers and contractors and other government employees who required top secret security clearances. I did that job for about 5.5, 6 years. And while I was driving around out in the desert around Fort Bliss, or traveling to some remote areas where they were doing all kinds of crazy testing out in the desert, I started to get this idea in my head about how a person who has granted somebody a security clearance holds a lot of power. And I got this idea that perhaps a person could grant a security clearance to somebody who is a Taliban operative, that might have been planted in the US Army. And when that operative was called to go live, they would go back and say, well, how did this person get access to all of these top secret locations or information? And they would go back and look at the person who granted the security clearance. And so I came up with the idea of this story. And as that happened, I got a call from my boss, and she said, I just want you to know that we have somebody in our team has worked on a case for a man named Edward Snowden. And we're figuring out who touched his case on our team, because whoever did is going to have to go and testify, because he, as you know, has divulged all sorts of national security secrets to the public. And I remember I drove home and I was like, my stomach was just, in the drop down into the, pit of my body. And I went and I looked in my safe, because we're allowed to keep logs of all of the cases we worked. And we worked on hundreds of cases. And sometimes you would barely touch a case. You would just be going to pull a record for somebody or interview a source or whatever. And I went through my case just looking for the last name, Snowden, 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 Snowden. And as it turns out, I did not work on his case, but my colleague and a good friend of mine did. And she went to DC. She had her clearance revoked, and she testified. And she went through hell for about 6 months, basically trying to prove that she had done her part in the her part in the investigation of Edward Snowden. She could not have predicted that he would divulge national secrets, and she eventually got her clearance back and went to work. Well, about maybe 2 or 3 years later, my family and I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And when we did, my work changed. Like, I would have to start traveling to Southern California to do background investigations on contractors, because in Arizona, there's not a high concentration of people who need clearances. Like in El Paso, there's a huge military bliss, there's Customs and Border Patrol, there's everybody needs a clearance in El Paso, but in Arizona you don't. And so my job was to go to other places and do it, and it just didn't really work out because my kids were in middle school, we were living in a new place, my husband had started a new job that was taking him away from the home all the time, and I decided I was gonna retire. And I turned in all my credentials, I debriefed, and the next day I said, okay, well, now what? I'm home, I'm not working full time anymore. And I remembered that I had this idea in my head about a story about an investigator who had granted a clearance to a Taliban operative. And I thought, well, I don't really know how to go about this, but I'm just going to start writing into a Word document every day, and I'm going to just try to write the story and see kind of where it goes. And so I did, and over a 3-month time, over the summer of, I want to say 2014, I wrote an entire book, and it was my first book, which is called Catch a Falling Star, and it looks like this. And then I thought, okay, well, now that I've written this book, what do I do? And so I went about teaching myself and taking classes and immersing myself in the publishing world, you know, in my 40s. And I'd never really written anything before. I didn't really know, you know, how that whole system worked, but I thought, well, I'm going to figure it out. And by the end of that year, I had self-published it. I published it myself. I had hired professional editors, and I had hired a professional cover designer, and I started working with a woman on doing marketing to figure out how I can actually make a self-published book a successful book. And one of the things that always had kept coming back to me when I would pitch the idea to people or try to get people interested is they were like, oh, you were a federal investigator, you knew what was going on, and now you're writing about something that a lot of people don't get to have access to. And so I kind of went with that. Now on the kind of balance side of this is that I had also been always fascinated with kind of the supernatural, ghost story, creepy things in the earth, you know, that you can't prove by quantitative measures. Like, that's always been something that's interesting to me. And one night I was getting ready for bed, and my husband had been listening to a podcast called Mysterious Universe, which are these two guys in Australia, and they, you know, talk about everything from Sasquatch to alien sightings, and they were interviewing a renowned researcher in the supernatural world named Rosemary Ellen Guiley. And she has written and published over 50 books, and most of them have been about people's interactions with the jinn, and that's spelled D as in Delta, J-I-N-N. And what the jinn are, most Westerners would know them as the word a genie. But in the Middle Eastern culture, there's a strong belief, a strong superstitious belief that these kind of entities, these tricksters who, you know, can manipulate the way that you think about things, are still kind of running rampant and affecting daily life. And I listened to this long interview that she gave on the podcast about this book she had just written. You know, her and this guy had gone to the Middle East. They went into caves in Afghanistan, trying to find where these jinn, you know, these phosphorus creatures who are not human exist. And it was like listening to a ghost story. It was really fascinating. But then, well, you know, I wonder, like, if there was a way that the U.S. government would validate the existence of these supernatural creatures and maybe even have some kind of secret, you know, sort of black-funded agency look into them. And what if my main character comes, that everything she's been dealing with and that her bloodline has been dealing with were actually because of this supernatural creature, the jinn, infiltrating into government policy. And so I dove into that and basically then wrote my second book, and this one is called The Path of Least Resistance. And this one, I took this idea that the jinn had, and I had modeled a character after my husband who had been in the Middle East, who had been in the Gulf during, in 1990, during the liberation of Kuwait. And I had talked to other veterans who have, you know, just told me about just some of the weird things that they experienced when they were traveling in the Middle East. And I thought, okay, well, maybe what I'll do now on this book is I'll take this idea of the jinn and have had the combat vet character who was in the war over there, have had him had some kind of interaction with the jinn so that now it ties into her world. And so I ended up writing this entire book about more about the jinn, the supernatural aspect, and then I tied it together with a shadow government agency that that utilizes something called remote viewing, you know, which used to be kind of a conspiracy theory, but then it, you know, came out in the 90s that we did actually look into it as the government and said it didn't work. And I fashioned a whole book around that. And I said, okay, well, that's really cool. And I contacted Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who in the circles of the supernatural world, in the jinn world especially, she is the, you know, global expert on it. And she contacted me back and I sent her my books and I said, you know, you really inspired me to add the supernatural element into my, you know, military fiction. And oddly enough, just this kind of an interesting side note, after she received my books and started reading them, she had messaged me and said she was going to write me a really great review. She passed away about a week later. And I just thought this is one of those creepy things that happens in life. She was still quite young and fit. Anyway, I then went to work on the third book in this series. And what I did is I took the idea of the jinn. This is the third book. It's called Before the Fall. And I had, you know, my main character, my investigator, who had granted a top secret clearance to a Taliban operative, and her history and her family history about it. And then I had her trying, in this book, trying to actually escape this cursed jinn. And so the way that she does that is by traveling to sub-Saharan Africa to volunteer to seek out elephant poachers with a mercenary group. And that has been probably the biggest project of the three of them, because I have no background in going to Africa and elephant poaching hunting, but I found, you know, a historical fact, a historical militia group in Africa called the Lord's Resistance Army, and basically based the whole antagonist off of this militia group, and then wrote a fiction book around it. So just right now, what I'm working on, I have self-published all three of these books and have, you know, built every review, every following, everything that I can online has been me. I don't have an agent or a publisher, but now what I'm working on is trying to get these books optioned into either a movie series or a TV series. So over the last year, from about the end of 2018 up until the beginning of 2020, I've traveled to Los Angeles, which I can drive from here. It's not unreasonable to do that. And I've made friends at Paramount Pictures and some pretty prominent agents over there by going to all kinds of book fests to talk to them, and have been able to garner some interest in my project. The one thing that they have all told me is that I need to write a whole nother manuscript to get representation by an agent. So that's what I've been working on for the last 6 months. And that's been really great. And that's kind of exactly where I am right now. But I thought you all might be, I know, interested in the military aspect of the books, but also because I noticed that there was an author coming in who was going to talk about ghost stories that they had as well. And so I thought this would be a really good mix, because we could talk about the military part of it, but then also the sort of supernatural aspect of it. And that's pretty much it. I'm open to any questions or comments.
Anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
You say you're
Hello.
self-publishing. Hello, this is Doug. My name is Doug Baxter.
Hi, Doug.
You self-published. Did you go through Amazon and Amazon's books?
Yes. So the biggest distributor of self-publishers is Amazon, and the ebook side of Amazon as well. Pretty much anybody can self-publish a book, and I have been doing that, and I've been helping people with their memoirs and with the books that they've written go through the self-publishing process, because it is a process.
Is it
Yeah.
hard formatting to their system, or?
Well, yes and no.
Programmer.
I actually hired that out because you can format it pretty easily if you want to put the time into it, but I actually sit on a full service author and writer company that's out of Michigan, and we have the people that do the formatting. We call it interior design, the people that do the covers and all of that stuff, because a lot of times what happens is that when you format it yourself, if you're not savvy to it,
Yep.
you end up putting it in, and then the product comes back to you, like your author copies come back with errors. And fixing those, and they're little errors, fixing those is extremely time consuming and frustrating. And so my advice to people, unless they are technically savvy or have done it before, is to hire someone to do it. It's worth the money, but you certainly can do it yourself. Yeah. So one of the things with Amazon that's always a good thing to consider is that if you do go the route of self-publishing your book and making it available as an ebook on Kindle, they have a program that's called KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing Select. And if you do want your ebook available on other platforms like iBooks, the Apple platform, or anything, or Nook, or anything like that, you need to opt out of the KDP Select. Just kind of a thing to think about if you're going that route.
Yeah, the monopoly, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you do the same practice that a lot of new people do, is they charge a free copy or a 99-cent copy and then build up prices, or how did you fix prices?
Well, what I did was fixed prices. And then what I would do is on the launch, I would make the ebook a 99-cent book during the launch to build up the numbers so that your ratings go up.
Yep.
And then since I use KDP Select, you get 5 days of a free promotion every 3 months. And I usually just pick 5 days. If I have an event that I'm going to, or somebody that I'm pitching my material to, what I'll do is I'll set up a free book giveaway for the couple of days before that, and that way all your numbers just will blow right up.
Yep.
So,
Do you have a writer's blog that's connected to this? Or a writer's website?
Do I have a blog?
Yes, I mean, that's connected to your publishing with the Amazon, so you tell people what you're working on now and give snippets of passages and stuff like that. I see some books, some authors are doing that, yeah.
Yeah, I use my Facebook page as my main platform, and then I also use I use my author page directly on there, and then I've put in some blogs. I'll do snippets here and there. Mostly, I use it to promote it when I'm doing a price drop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Doug, are you writing a book?
No, I was just curious as
He reads them.
I read them from Amazon, their ebooks and so forth, and you sort of get a pattern of what's going on because there are a lot of 99-cent books out there, and then jump in price, or some they play a trick of having the third book be 99 cents, and all the others are higher, so that you pick by one of them and you buy up the earlier copies, editions. And so like there's a little game that's being played. Yeah,
And those are all downloads he's talking about. They are not.
Yep.
Yeah, they're no, you can't give your physical book away. You can do that with the downloads. Yeah.
I really like the downloads because then I'm not cluttering a bookshelf with a lot of books.
I know, right? I'm the same way. I read on my little iPad Kindle, and
yeah, I do too.
And I always get free books. I always look for the free downloads on there. It's a great. Some of them aren't that great, and that's okay. So you didn't spend the money on them.
You always check the ratings, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Ratings are very important, and reviews.
Now the numbers are the comments. That's the most helpful for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always like when people write a lot of detail about the book because then you have a better sense what it is. But a lot of people just say, a couple lines, oh, wonderful book, and so forth. But the ones that are detailed are most helpful for a buyer.
Yeah. Yeah. My first book is at, I think I have either 65 or 70 reviews. And some of them are professional, professional reviewers that I send a copy of the book to for their review. Yeah.
I noticed they're now having international reviewers too attached to a number of books that are published by Americans.
Yeah.
New.
Yeah, so my first book got picked up by an audiobook publisher, which was very exciting for me. So it's available on CD or audiobook, and it's they're pretty big, well-known audiobook publishing company in LA. So that was my big win last year, is that I represented myself and negotiated that to get picked up.
Good. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good questions, Doug. Any others?
It looks like Carol and John.
Mike?
Okay.
Okay.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
You said because you're trying to get one or more of these books on TV or movies that you had to do a manuscript. Not sure, how does that compare to the book? Are you writing screen dialogue?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. So a manuscript is an unpublished book, basically. And with especially the big production companies in Los Angeles, they only want vetted material that somebody else, such as a household name publisher, says is good work. So they don't want to see anything that didn't come through that sort of vetting. Right. A manuscript is basically the book that just has not been put out there. So when you have, like right now I'm working on a manuscript, it's in a Word document, it's not going to stay there. I'm chapter 20 out of 24, I'm almost done with it right now. Even up until the point that it's been professionally edited and proofread, and like it literally could be handed to somebody as a book, until that document is published either by myself or somebody else or put out there, it's still just a manuscript. So the term manuscript just basically means unpublished.
Okay, so they want a manuscript for another book before
Exactly.
they will do a movie or
Yeah.
TV of the previous books.
Yeah, and so you're right. That's exactly it. They want what's called a standalone story. And so what I did is I actually took the storyline of my two of my main characters. Their names are James and Lauren. And I took the storyline of them traveling to the Congo in Africa to fight elephant poachers, and I turned that into a standalone manuscript. So what I did is I mined some of the storyline from my third book and have basically turned it into a brand new standalone book. So the plot is that James Baer is a Hollywood action hero, and he's, good looking, rugged guy in all of the shoot 'em up movies, and he tries his first hand at a dramatic role. And the reviews just come back horrible. They hate him. They're like, he's thick, he's one-dimensional, he should stick to shooting up people without a shirt on. And he, instead of like saying, okay, well, I'm going to take some acting classes or I'm going to try this again, he goes to a charity event where they're raising money for this mercenary group called Tiembo Mercenary, and that means elephant in Swahili. And he meets this real, like, kind of, vivacious guy who's like a, has like some swagger. And he's like, you should come to Africa with these guns, and we're going to find elephant poachers, and you're going to help be a good guy, and we know you can do it. And so he basically says, okay, and gets himself into a whole bunch of trouble because he's a trained actor who people think is a soldier, but he has no training to go be boots on the ground with like hardened guerrillas toting AKs out in the bush in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so that's the irony of the story. So I basically have turned, I'm almost done with it. I'm excited. I have 2 agents who already have read the first couple chapters and they're just like, finish. And so, yeah, it's turned into an amazing story. Yes. Thank you.
I think it's fascinating that you have to create a 4th standalone before you can, video publish the others.
That was my question. Why do they make you do a manuscript to show that you're creative? You have creative chops or something?
I know. I went to LA for 2 years. Just with my books in hand and you can't fake how the reception is online. You can't, I go there and I'm like, look, I have more reviews and better standing than some of the books that have been traditionally published. But what it all comes down to is the person who greenlights a project doesn't want to be responsible for saying that they thought this book was good. And what they want to do is they want to fall back on a traditional publisher, not just an online, not an online trend. And so I tried to get around it as much as I could. I really did. Believe me, I was like, if somebody's going to do it, I'm going to do it. And it didn't work. And I finally really hooked up with a couple of people in LA who have the ability to push this through. And I said, okay, I'll do the manuscript. I'll do the work. And I'm thrilled really by it, even though it's been a lot of work, because this manuscript I'm working on right now is brilliant. And I wouldn't have been able to do that maybe a year ago,
Greater experience, yes.
Yeah, and I have an amazing writers group. If any of you are thinking of writing, that's the first thing I'd tell you to do, is get involved with the writers group.
Leah, are your writers that you're involved with, are they around you or are they all over the country?
Well, we actually are all local, and up until about 2 months ago, we meet every Thursday night at this restaurant that's maybe, 15 minutes away from my house. And it's a tight group that I've gotten into. One guy, he owns a publishing company. They're all very well read, very well written. They've made me a better writer. But since COVID happened, when all the restaurants closed down, we actually have moved to this format. And so we do this every Thursday night.
Very good. Very good. Any other questions? Ken,
That's Ken.
you're on mute, Ken.
Hi,
Okay.
Ken.
So, Leah, so when you get to write a story, do you like do a construct of, you set out all these chapters? Do you kind of have an idea where the story's going, or do you let it kind of go where it goes as you're writing it?
Oh, that's changes from year to year sometimes, but I have found that I usually know the beginning, the middle, and the end. And one thing my editor, the editor I work with right now, who's an incredibly talented person, he actually had me write, when we got halfway through this manuscript, he's like, you need to write the last chapter right now. He goes, it doesn't have to be perfect, just you have to hit all the, how you want the story to end. And he's been training me to write ahead a little bit more and then go in and fill in stuff. You know, since I write historical fiction, I do have to look at what's going on in like 2014 or 2012 or 2001. Like I have to sort of, what I do is I'll find like a historical event. Like for example, I just used the kidnapping of 139 schoolgirls in Uganda. That was a big thing in the news in 2008.
Is that
And
Boko Haram that did that, or whatever
yeah,
it is?
exactly. And so I used that and I said, okay, well, this, at least I can build this in right now and relate it all together. But all of the little things that sort of happen around it, you know, the fact that my two characters are at an elephant orphanage while that happens and what their conversations are, those things I allow a lot of breadth for them to just do what they want. Because that'll happen as you're writing. But I'm pretty rigid about setting up an outline and knowing sort of beginning, middle, end. And then if there's things that I just know I want to hit in there, I'll just kind of, I use little sticky notes, I'll place them in. But then when you sit down and actually write, I'll allow myself the freedom to freeform write those little scenes. But the scenes are usually set up.
So you ever go down a line with a story and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't like this anymore. I don't like where this is going.
Yeah.
You know, I gotta go.
I hate that. Because you're like, I put all this work in, and that's why it's important to have a really good editor and writing group, because they
Sure.
will, as a writer, you're like, oh, I rewrote this chapter 6 times, you know? I don't want to just scrap it. And that's why having a good writing group and a good editor is so crucial, because they'll tell you like, nah, it's not working, you know? And then yeah. But yeah, that's happened to me a few times.
Wouldn't it? That could be hurtful too, in a way, if you invest a lot of your energy and emotion in it, and they're like, you know what, that's not really that good. I mean, have you had to deal with that?
Oh yeah, I have. The writing group I'm in, they are all much more seasoned than I am. Again, I started writing in 2014. This isn't my, you know, this is something I'm new to in my life. And the first time I went, I thought I had it. Like, I'm like, oh, this is fine. I just rewrote a chapter. This is my introduction in. I've, you know, done all these things so well. And they tore it apart. And I went home and I was upset, swore I was never going to go back. But then I realized, like, okay, that's just me learning how to take criticism, you know.
And they're being candid. That was the best thing they could do for you, was to be honest.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's why I'm better now. I've been with them now for over a year. And I mean, you know, if you have a writing group and all they're doing is telling you that everything is great, it doesn't really help you, you know. But we all try to be nice with each other,
Sure.
you know.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, me and my wife are going to buy all 3 of your books, because they sound interesting.
Well, thank you.
I'm
That's what I
retired
thought too.
military, and so is my wife. But the funny thing is, I don't like military books.
Yeah.
Well,
there's a little bit of everything in there.
but because of the way you've combined things, I'm very interested in reading it. So I wish you the best. I think I think it's wonderful that you're brave enough to do this, and you're being successful at it. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it.
I had a question. Oh, John had a question first. I'll let John go first.
Somebody else. There we go. The writing group is, I mean, how does that work? Do you each share what your beginning, middle, end is and the project and say, here's chapter 7 and this is how it fits in? Is that kind of the way it works?
For a little, so there's some pretty strict rules because we are an open group. So if people are working on, if they're working on something and they want to come and give feedback, you know, we welcome anybody. So you can submit up to 2,200 words in one session. And when we meet in person, you have to bring copies of your, I don't have any, I haven't printed mine out for tonight yet, but you have to bring copies of your words for the group. And then you pass them around, and there's always a group moderator, and then you read out loud while everybody reads along and writes down what they're doing. And you only get feedback on exactly what you bring. Now, there's, you know, 8 of us that we're all going every week, and we know what's going on in our stories, and we're doing chapter by chapter. And so we give, you know, when you're working with people like that, you give them feedback that is, you know, you can tell them a little bit about what you think their whole story is doing. But we also have people, like we had a woman who had to do a speech for like a teacher's thing, and she just like popped into our group and brought her speech and read it, and we all gave her feedback, you know. And so you know, we just put the guidelines in as saying you can bring what you want, you can only bring this many words in one night, and if you keep coming back, you'll find that people will follow your story along and be able to give you that sort of feedback. But we try to make it so that you're not giving people homework. You know, we don't expect people to read other people's stuff when outside of the group. So some of us do with each other, but.
So how long does it take to read 2,200 words?
It takes about 9 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if it's a big group, then we give, everybody has like 2 to 3 minutes to give their feedback.
Okay.
And if there's not a lot of readers, you get a little bit more time to give feedback. But it's all very strict and very, very organized, which is nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So my question was,
Yeah.
Are your books on Audible? You said something about one of your books got picked up.
The first one is, that's the one that got picked up. They want to do the second one. We're looking at the fall. Yeah, Catch a Falling Star is on Audible, so you can listen to it with a credit, or you can order the CDs. You know, I don't know if people do that. And the woman who was the voice actor, her name's Gabrielle DeCoeur, and it's published through Skyboat Media, and she's an award-winning voice actress. She did an amazing job with it. She really did. It was better than I could have even imagined.
I just saw something recently where that's a whole new career, and people actors are getting into that field, and they're winning awards for reading material.
Well, when I went to they have this big giant house and studios in Los Angeles. I actually met Casey Affleck, who was one of their voice actors in one of the studios in their house when they were touring me around, and he was voicing one of their books. That was kind of exciting.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Leah, that was awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk about my books and what I do and my vision. And, you know, if any of you, you know, read them, like them, don't like them, you know, leave reviews, that's great. Anything at all, you know, I'm just happy to get out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Namaste.
Should I? Namaste. Oh, thank you so much. Should I leave the meeting now, or?
If there are no more questions, yeah, you can get ready for your next meeting.
Yeah, I got my writer's group tonight. I got to go print off and read a bunch of stuff. I've worked with most of the guys, and they're all science fiction writers, so you have to like really concentrate when you're reading it.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. It was super nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was really good, Tony.
You can turn the recording off.
There we go.
Then send me the link, okay?
I